Well, welcome everybody to Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I'm the pastor, sometimes recovering heretic, and with us is Dan.
The always recovering heretic.
Yeah.
Or always heretic, sometimes recovering?
We'll
always
always recovering.
yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, let's get started with the very basics. What is the point of Lent?
There's lots of points. Preparation and renewal for Easter, I guess I would say. So it's a season of intentional. There are lots of answers. Overall, it's about intentionality.
Okay.
So intentional penance. There are things we need to repent of. Intentional preparation. So it's also the season where we get ready to baptize people. Intentional struggles toward holiness. We do the kind of little giving up things, but this is why people do things and take time. Intentional practicing of your faith. Overall, it's a dedicated season of penance and a dedicated season of remembering that, yes, we are sinful, yes, we are human beings, yes, we are flawed, so that when we get to Easter, we hear this wonderful message of there is new life, there is forgiveness, all that.
So for 40 days, you've been focusing on what's wrong with you, and now you can look at what's good?
Yeah.
Forgive yourself?
I would say it is a hard look at, let's put it this way, it is about rejecting denial. I don't think it's necessarily about saying you're a miserable human being, but it's about truth-telling for 40 days.
So it's about being honest with yourself.
Right, it's about being honest about who you are and what you are, which is both freeing, the person in recovery from addiction, that moment when they're finally honest with themselves that, yes, I am an addict. It's actually the most freeing moment they have, And so in some ways it's this incredibly grace-filled time because we are being honest with ourselves. But part of being honest is also it hurts sometimes, And so it's about honesty and truth-telling, with yourself and with the world around you.
Yeah, I wonder about that. That's in growing up Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
I always associated Lent with a lot of guilt.
Yes.
Instead of giving my own observation, your observation, why is that? Why do? And I think it goes beyond Catholics. There's a lot of Lent that oozed out from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Whether it was because of actual dictates or just because of the way people practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so what about Lent makes me feel that way?
Well, I mean, that is partially about the season, right? And so, even we begin with Ash Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
But my words on Ash Wednesday are, you will die, one. And two, we do a much longer confession and forgiveness. It's multiple lines, and so, I think, the guilt part is just part of it. There are things we should feel guilty over where I think the Catholics sometimes go astray, or Catholic Church, and this isn't just even Catholics, where Christians can go astray is we can add things to be guilty about. And so, I don't know about you, I got a lot to feel guilty about in my life. And
my mom made sure I knew I had a lot to feel guilty about.
Right, well, but this is the trick, right, is that you have enough to feel guilty about without adding extra things to feel guilty about. And this is one of Luther's big things is, we got enough sins that we need to confess without making up rules that then people feel like they have to confess about the made up rules that got added on, So the no meat thing, Luther's kind of, but that's fine if you do it, says Luther, but don't do it if it makes you just feel more guilty, because you got enough to feel guilty about in your own life without feeling guilty about a rule that the church made up.
Yeah. So that's one of the differences then, is that in Catholicism you have these strictures
Yeah.
It's like, no meat, especially on Friday.
Right.
And on Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
But in Lutheranism, it's optional.
Well,
It's a good idea,
it's good to do as long as it brings you closer to God. If it doesn't bring you closer to God and all it does is make you feel guilty, Luther would say stop doing it.
Okay.
Because, and this is Luther's big point, is nowhere in the Bible does it say no meat except on Fridays. That's actually a church tradition. And church traditions are fine if they bring you closer to God. If they do not, you can stop doing them because they're not actually, there's enough commanded in the Bible without actually adding things on top of that. And I don't think it's just Catholics. I mean, every Christian religious people are good at this, are good at, on top of the things that are actually commanded, making up things that people should do on top of that.
Yeah.
And we're just religious people in general are good at doing that. And so, this is why for Lutherans the giving up something isn't as big a deal. It's kind of like, it's like I say to people, well, I asked people on Ash Wednesday, are you giving up something? And I said, it's perfectly fine if you're not. And it is. I mean that. It's perfectly fine if you're not.
Okay. So why did you ask them if they were then?
Well, because I want them to be strengthened, because we were going to pray about it. And so if you are giving up something, if you are practicing something, I want to pray that God strengthen you in your discipline and give you the strength to continue it through these 40 days. And, and all those things are good to pray for. But if you're not, it's perfectly fine. Because nowhere in all of the Bible does it command you to actually give up something for 40 days. And so Jesus tells us enough of what we're to do. Rather than focusing on, did you eat meat during the week? Did you give up chocolate? I think the real goal is to say, did you love your neighbor? Did you,
Yeah. So giving up something that's more on a self-help vein,
well,
of I want to lose weight, so I'm going to give up chocolate, isn't really the point. The point is to choose something that deepens your faith.
Right. And so, you can deepen your faith by practicing self-denial. That's great.
Yeah. Not eating this suffering by not eating what I love reminds me of Jesus' suffering.
Right. Or reminds me of what I really need. Or reminds me how much I am. When I was a smoker, I used to give up smoke. I tried to give up smoking every Lent. Never worked. But it's proof that I am a sinner in need of actual redeeming. And so, it's not so much about, I think where a lot of people experience this with the Catholic Church, but again, you can experience it anywhere, is religious people are good at creating rules that then we make people feel guilty about for not following the made-up rules we made up.
That sounds cruel.
It is, but it happens all the time, right? And this is Luther's big thing. This was his big thing with indulgences, actually. He was like, why are you ordering so much about purgatory? He says this in the 95 Theses. He's like, why are you sending people, or why are you telling people they're going to purgatory for rules that the church made up? Why doesn't the church just forgive everybody of those things that the church made up? That's very much Lutheran logic. We've got enough trouble with the actual commands. Don't heap more on yourself.
Right, because then we'll never be able to.
Right, because that's just asking for more trouble for yourself.
Well, I'm given all that, then why did it get started in the first place? What's the origin of Lent? Does this go back to Irenaeus?
Well, it's one of those things that's so old that it doesn't really have a formal, or there is a formal moment where it's systematized, but it's so old.
Was that the Council of Nicaea?
Yeah, so the Council of Nicaea is where there's a document that actually says 40 days in preparation to Easter. Okay. We practice, fasting, self-denial, repentance, all those things,
Now, given that it came out of the Council of Nicaea, which seemed to be half of its job, this is what, 325?
Yeah, 325. Yeah.
325 AD. But it seemed like they were called together because every bishop had his or her own way doing Mass, I guess observing Lent, whatever other traditions there were. So what were they bringing together? What were the different ways that Lent was being practiced?
So kind of how it gets started probably is that going back as far as you can really think, Easter has always been a good day to get baptized. And in fact, this is what, to this day, when things are back to normal, we'll probably try and do an Easter Vigil. And there are 4 parts to an Easter Vigil service. Well, part 3 is the baptism service. And you can watch the Easter Vigil service from the Vatican on PBS, and you'll see that Vatican always has like 25 people that get baptized at the Easter Vigil. It's because that was the day, still is, the preferred day for baptism, is Easter service. So from there, it is also a command, going back as far as you can count, back to this document we call the Didache, which is the oldest non-Bible thing we have in writing from Christians, or one of them. It's so old, it's called the Teaching of the Apostles. And it's so old it could have possibly been authored by the apostles.
Wow.
And it's kind of like a manual for Christian basics plus all these basic rules, So one of the things it says in there is before a candidate is to be baptized, the baptizer is to spend a dedicated amount of time in prayer and preparation for their baptism. So if most people are getting baptized on Easter, then that meant there's also this period of time leading up to Easter where most people are preparing to be baptized. And that's kind of the essence of Lent. And so that's also why it's a baptismal season, is because out of that started becoming this formal tradition of, we're all just in preparation because lots of people were in preparation to be baptized then anyway.
Yeah.
The other source, the kind of stream they're bringing to it, is the Egyptian church had a tradition of, after the Transfiguration, of having a dedicated couple weeks of fasting. And so these two streams kind of get merged into 40 days of dedicated fasting before Easter.
So let's get to that then. Why 40? What's magical about 40 days?
Biblical numerology, right? Numbers are always highly symbolic in the Bible.
Yeah, and 40 seems to be a really 40 days.
Rain, 40 days in the wilderness,
right.
40 days,
40 years wandering for Exodus.
Right, 40,
yeah.
So biblical numerology, right? 4 is the number of creation or earth, and 10 is the number of power. So 10 times 4 is
40.
40.
So you have earth power.
Right, or power displayed in creation,
Okay.
So do you think about those times where it's 40, the flood, it rains for 40 days and 40 nights.
So in actuality, it could have been, like a 2-day thing.
Well,
but because it was such a big event,
right,
we're saying it's 40.
It's 40. It was a number that made, it's kind of like cultures have numbers that kind of mean more than the number means, right?
Yeah.
So 9 innings in a baseball game, right? But everybody knows if I say 7th inning stretch, it's got nothing to do with have there been 7 series of something, right? It's just, I know what 7th inning stretch means. It means time to get up and after doing your work for a while, right? And I learned this when I went to Hungary for a couple of weeks. If you use 7th inning stretch as a metaphor in Hungary, they don't get it because they're not baseball people,
right?
and so.
So in the Mideast,
just
Mesopotamia, that era.
40 would have conveyed this thing, just like, again, 7th inning does to us, or there's any number of numbers that would in our culture, 3 strikes, right? if I use that. It's got actually occasionally, like we wrote a law that had a literal 3 strikes to it, but really more what we're talking about, if I say that's your 3rd strike,
you're out.
That's got really nothing to do with did you do this 3 times. It's just trying to say
that was the last one.
You're done, you know.
Yeah. Even I get that. I
know
nothing about sports.
Right. So see, that's a baseball metaphor, and it's a number, but the number is not really about the number. It's about conveying what it's an idiom that conveys certain things. Same thing with 40.
So for us today, 40 is just a number, but then you used it because it had the subtext.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's poetry, right? So
Yeah.
like it had it. You used it because it conveyed this subtext that people reading it would have gotten.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
and they might have thought it was a literal 40 days. That's the trick. They might have thought it was a literal 40 days, but it was 40 days because
of this symbolic
subtext that's going on. You know, and so that's not to say that the people reading it didn't literally think it was 40 days of rain or whatever, you know, but they might have literally thought that, you know, but it wouldn't have been any other number. And it wouldn't have been any other number because 40 carries with it this grand subtext.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what about this is, my wife will laugh knowingly, but when I counted up Lent on the calendar,
it's not 40 days.
It's not 40 days. It came up to more than 40.
Sundays don't count in our counting.
Sundays don't count?
Yeah.
Why?
Because Sundays are a mini Easter. Because Christ is literally present in the Eucharist. And so you can't be, Jesus' own words, you know, while the bridegroom is with them, you know, they're celebrating. There cannot be mourning. So, well, you know, we're celebrating. Actually, technically, for all you do in your 40-day fast, you could take a break every Sunday.
So that was going to be my next question. Does that then mean you've got this loophole?
Yes,
every
you do.
Sunday
Right.
Every Sunday can be Mardi Gras.
Right. Every Sunday you could have chocolate or whatever.
Yeah.
Now that's if you're in the Western Church.
Oh.
If you're in the Eastern Church, Sundays count. This is one of the reasons why the Orthodox celebrate Easter on a different day. Is because they're counting 40 days with Sundays.
So yeah, they say this is the law, and by God,
right.
you
It's
don't
40
get
straight days, Sundays included. The Western Church has said Sunday's a mini Easter. We celebrate it, you know, because Christ is present. It's not included in the counting. So
yeah, that kind of makes sense to me, just because I'm half Italian.
Yeah.
And the Italian family is always joyous and celebratory, and so I could understand why, you know, Rome would decide, nah, you can't be depressed for the whole 40
Right,
days. Every 6 days, take a break and have fun.
Right, take a break and have fun. Right. And so 40 days does on our count. So if you counted 40 days minus the Sundays,
yeah,
it would end up on Wednesday, before Maundy, Thursday.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we've discovered a loophole. So I just want to point out, those of you who watch this live, you just got your first major benefit of watching live instead
You
of
can
recording.
all have chocolate again on
Yeah,
Sunday.
you know, today,
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah,
as soon as the Q&A is over, go out, feast. You can break all your Lent promises.
Right, you can break all the Lent promises right now.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
That is cool, okay?
Right.
6 decades on the planet, 6 decades of suffering for 40 plus days.
For 40 plus days. Now you know.
Now I know.
Now you know.
Oh, I'm happy. I mean, we could end right there, and
Right.
I'd be perfectly content.
Yeah, Sundays don't count.
What else did Luther write about Lent? Is there anything else that's different than the way I learned as a Catholic?
Probably it would surprise you how much it sounded like a Catholic. You know, Luther does not think of himself as a Lutheran. He thinks of himself as a Catholic. You know, and so he's not against people doing all these things. He's against there being requirements to do these. You know, it's a pastoral thing for Luther. You know, so if you read him, he'll sound very Catholic. You know, he does all these things. He practices them himself. He thinks the guy was a monk. You know, yeah. So his problem is burdening. He calls it burdening the conscience of the simple Christian. Like here's this guy, here's Farmer Joe trying to live his life. He's got enough troubles. His Lord hates him. He's going to have to pay taxes to the emperor. And here you are saying,
on top of that,
you can't have meat on Wednesdays. Like, okay. Give the dude a break.
Well, I mean, with the meat on Wednesdays thing, right? Now, fish on Friday.
Right.
That's something that's passed on into secular culture, became so dominant.
It became so dominant, right.
That now in secular culture, during Lent, it's Fish Fry Friday.
Right.
How did that get started? Why did fish become an exception to meat?
I have no idea why fish are an exception to meat.
And then why Friday? Why was Friday the day for fish?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Darn it, I want answers.
Well, there were certain days that were commanded. I'm certain it was some connection to Christ died on a Friday. We fast from meat on a Friday. That's almost certainly what the connection is, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But, okay, the logic of the people who would advocate for those kind of things, and they have a point, is that it's all fine and good what Luther says, that it's good to do it if you want to do it.
Yeah.
But then nobody does it. Which is...
So what's the point then?
Right. Well, that people, and they would say people need certain structures to command them to do these things. They're not particularly wrong about... I mean, I don't fast because I'm hypoglycemic and it will kill me. But, like how many people actually practice fasting in our real, honest to God? Jesus says when you fast.
Yeah.
He doesn't say if. He says when you fast.
Right.
How many people actually practice that?
Well, and that's another point. I think I was in my mid-40s by the time I realized that when the church said fast, they didn't mean you could abstain from all food.
Yeah.
And up until then, especially on Ash Wednesday, and I tried most Fridays as well, I ate nothing, and if I drank, I only drank water. Right. And that was hard.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Because I'm like you, I border on hypoglycemia.
Right.
And I have a hyper-fast metabolism. So
that
was, for me, my version of hell.
Right.
And then I went to an Ash Wednesday Mass, and during the homily, the priest got up and started talking about the wonderful spread he had for lunch that day.
Right.
And this magnificent cake that a parishioner brought over and how delicious it was. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute.
Right.
I had nothing today, and you're the priest. I'm supposed to be following your example, and you gorged before you came to Mass?
Right.
And that's when I found out in what I interpreted I was supposed to do for Lent was different from the way the church actually expected you to practice.
Right, right. And so in their defense, and they have a point, that without creating the structures for people to do these things, they won't do them. And that's, so another example. There's actually, as Lutherans, we are not against individual confession, private confession. We actually even have a liturgy for it. It's in the Red Book. You can pull out your hymnal and turn to it. And Luther said it was good to do. He just didn't think it should be commanded. The result of that, however, is that I have known I have done individual confession with somebody twice in my whole career.
Whoa.
Yeah. And the point of those people is that without the requirement, the command to do it, people won't do it. Given human nature. And they have a point, but Luther's response to that, and I think this is the better response, is you can't invent a command where there is no command.
Yeah.
There are enough commands as it is without inventing more of them.
Yeah.
And so it's a question of what are you trying to do? Are you trying, do you trust that even if they don't fast, God's got it? Or do you think, no, we're trying to encourage people to grow in holiness, and the only way to do that is to help them along a bit,
Yeah.
So.
Well, given that, then, do you think, and this obviously is purely speculative, but do you think that looking at how lax Lenten practice has become, do you think the church founders, maybe going back to the apostles themselves, but do you think they would feel we've gotten too wimpy about Lent? That it doesn't really, it's lost its meaning to us?
Depending on how... I think they would feel we've gotten too wimpy about most things.
Really?
Well, if we're talking about founders, if we go back to the apostles, they literally did sell everything they owned and gave it to the church.
Yeah.
Acts.
I mean, that becomes, when you read, I got into a debate with somebody at one point because they were, it was one of those deals where I had enough of hearing people blanketly putting down socialism, or socialist stuff,
right,
without really knowing what that meant,
right.
And so I said, so you're saying the apostles were communists?
Right.
And they got really upset, and they said, what do you mean? And I said, if you read Acts of the Apostles,
right,
they lived in communes, and they owned nothing. Right. The group owned everything.
It was a kibbutz, like literally,
I mean, it's like that is the founding of communism right there.
Right.
And I took it a little far. It was one of those rare times that I kind of lost my temper. But when you read Acts, you're supposed to own nothing.
Right.
Everything is supposed to be shared.
And that's a very idealized picture of a community. I will grant that. It's the Disney Channel movie version of what the church should be, accepted.
Yeah.
But
and we follow that when you look even at today.
Yeah.
With cult leaders or with religious communes that start, the founders, it stays pure and it works. But as soon as you get to the next generation, it all dissipates away.
It all dissipates away. And there's, again, I'm not saying we're all bad Christians. We're, or maybe in the spirit of the season, yes, we are all bad Christians, but God is merciful. And we are all bad, and they were bad Christians too. We're all bad at this. But I think we in the first world, we in kind of Western Europe, North America, have gotten very comfortable. And the idea of difficulty as a church, difficulty as Christians, is hard for us. It's and maybe we don't even have to go back that far. You can go to places like China, where they face significant, if you're not a member of a state church, watch out, and so even some Christians today would call us kind of a little too spoiled, by the comfort.
Well, is there, like you mentioned before, that Christianity is really growing heavily, like Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference in the way the church that Christianity is practiced in Africa? Is it more pure there? Is it more direct because it's fresher? Or
I don't know if it's more pure. Well, have you ever seen it? It is very different. It's much more lively. It is. Even the Lutherans are Pentecostals in Africa.
Uh-huh.
So it's a very different experience than our experience. But, I mean, part of it is just, and you don't have to go all the way to Africa to find this, but the Spirit is just alive. It's alive here too, don't get me wrong. I like our church. But worship with First English one time. You have my permission when you go serve breakfast to stay and worship with First English.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a different experience.
Yeah.
And so, and not that it's more pure, but there is something about having to risk something for this faith. Makes it more believable and more energetic.
Yeah.
We don't have to risk an awful lot at this moment for our faith.
Here.
Right, here, in this place. But a lot of people do have to risk something, whether that's China or whether that's... there's a powerful video of... there was a bombing at St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria in Egypt. And the response of all the Coptic Christians at the cathedral was to go out into the street and start shouting the Nicene Creed.
Wow.
That was their response too.
I don't see that happening here.
No, right. Right. That was, again, not that I will that on anybody.
Right.
But when, one of the things Jesus promises a lot. One of the things he does promise is you will encounter resistance and suffering on account of this faith. And when you do, there's something about, okay, I've actually got to put my life on the line, or I've got to put my well-being or my reputation on the line for this faith. And that gives it, the Holy Spirit's there in that moment.
That is probably the best point to close on.
Yeah.
And again, you've blown my mind. Several points with
Yeah.
this. And Susan Shooter, by the way,
Yeah.
joins us in being happy that we now know about a loophole in Lenten fasting.
Yes, there's your loophole.
So we go from life or death.
I will warn, if you're looking for loopholes, you probably should just stop doing the
the fast in general.
Yeah, right. Because the fasting is meant to be a commitment that brings you closer to God. And if you're, again, Luther would say, just don't do it. It's fine.
Susan's probably like me. I wasn't looking for the loophole,
but it's good to know.
But I got to say, I was happy when
you found it.
Yeah.
I just remember, again, when I would try and give up smoking, I would invent all these little exceptions in my head.
Yeah.
And the exceptions would grow and grow and grow until finally it was like, so
forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it. So,
well, we won't forget about you. Don't forget about us.
Yep.
Remember, if you have your own questions, beam them over to us. You can respond on Facebook when we post the promos. You can email Pastor Dave directly at pastordave@relc.org. Talk to us, mail us, put it in the live chat. But this is your Q&A as well.
Yeah. Blessings, everybody.
Have a good first week of Lent.
Yes.